A 3-year study at the Centre for Land and Water's microfarm in Hastings has been looking at onion crop production. It's developed practical ways for growers to locate and monitor where the variations are occurring in their crops, and is identifying potential management strategies to deal with that variability.
The problem with variability is right throughout the onion industry. It's one of the most variable crops I've ever had anything to do with, and it can drive you nuts as a researcher because the results are quite messy compared to some other crops. But the work Plant and Food's doing and the work we're doing, we're trying to pin down what's causing that variability and how we can understand it and then better manage it. During this project, we've actually run a few different ways to look at the crop. So we've tried some green seeker technology, we've tried satellites, we've tried UAVs. But when you get too far from the crop, it's really hard to see much. And if you think about it, a small onion is like a needle pointing straight upwards, so there's nothing to see. So the thing we've found best is actually smartphone cameras from about 1.5 meters above the crop. And Chris, who works here as well, he developed some applications that can capture that data and convert the photo into a percentage of green pixels and log a GPS against that, so we can actually map how much canopy there is all the way across the paddock. The imagery that we've taken, we've actually had checks done by Plant and Food Research in the lab, and there's a really close connection between what we get in the field and a standard lab measurement. The difference is we can leave the onions growing, they have to chop them off and take them back home so that we can look at them next week and the week after and the week after as well. One of the things that might be causing variation is soil compaction, and you can't see that from the top, you've got to have a look inside it. So we just have a look to compare here across the bed, for example, or down the bed, or an area that's growing well, an area that's not growing so well, and see if compaction might be one of the causes. One of the things we've been thinking about is if I've only got half the canopy, I'm pretty confident I'm only get half the yield at the end of the year. Should I give it all the fertiliser that the full crop's going to get, or should I pull that fertiliser back a little bit? Because if I give it too much, there's two negatives in particular. One is that the onions themselves don't store so well, and if you get stuff going off in storage, then that's a real big problem. And the other is if you haven't used the nitrogen up with your crop, then it's sitting in the soil, and the risk of it leaching out and impacting on your farm nutrient balance is also a bit of a negative. So this year we've got some trials in where we've actually put half the rate of fertiliser on some areas and the full rate on, and we'll just follow that through to harvest and then weigh them and see if it cost us anything to leave the fertiliser off or if we were better off to leave it off.
In order to analyse the images and to decide what zone you're in, we basically need to know two things. The first is how much plant-to-plant variability there is. And that's largely driven by genetics. But there's also some other things like how fast they come out of the ground, how evenly they're spaced. So that's one part of the story that you need to know. Then, given that level of variability, if you look at across a field, there'll be areas where growth is slower than in others, or there's different populations than in others. And so that just increases the overall variability. So we've developed a model that can start to take all those factors into account. And then when you take images across the field, we can identify if one of those areas, if the growth is as good as it can be for the weather conditions that we've got, or if it's being limited by something in the soil or a disease or something like that. And that is the way that you can then start to interpret the images. I think one of the good things about it is that it can identify a spot or the spots in your field where growth isn't as good as it should be. And so a grower can go out and have a look there and start to decide why that might be. It also means that they can then maybe do some management that will either improve the outcome, or they might decide to do something like drop, say, fertiliser rates. And that way they can help maintain some environmental control as well. One of the things we're starting to find out is that storage outcomes from these different areas of your field are different as well. And so once, as more results come through from that, I think growers might be able to decide whether they're going to store different zones separately and market them separately. Nitrate testing can be quite a valuable tool for growers. Often what growers are doing is they're side dressing during the season. And so by having a nitrate test strip, they can know before they side dress how much nitrate is available for their crop in the soil. And that means that they can then manage their nitrogen to better match the requirements of the crop. And that way they can get a better nitrogen efficiency, a better return, and better environmental outcomes as well.
The growers have been observing us on the way through, and we've done field days and worked. We've had paddocks mapped in Pukekohe and in Rangitata down at Pendarvis. So the growers are actually engaged in the project there and observing what's going on. What we've found is that we know that we can identify variation in a paddock using the technology that we've developed. It doesn't tell us what causes the problem, but it tells us where to go looking. One of the things I discovered this year is I should have paid more attention to my really good areas for my disease management, because that's where the disease has got established when we had a lot of disease pressure. We're still working towards predicting yield. We've got some quite good data when the onions are only at 3 leaf stage as to where the variation is going to be and how much variation there'll be at harvest, assuming everything goes right. But we can't put our finger right on how many tonnes you're going to get at the end of the year yet. But that would be my dream, is we can say you're going to get this many tonnes very early. Then we can judge our nutrient inputs, but also they can know months in advance what they're going to have to sell. Anything that we do gets published on our Landwise website, and also Onions New Zealand, who's the industry body that's in charge of looking after farmers' interests. They publish it on their websites for the growers to have a look at as well.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.